Howdy, everybody. So today we're going to talk about the start of World War II. So the factors for roughly the decade leading up from the end of World War I to the beginning of World War II, really focusing on the rise of Hitler in Germany and of kind of the aggression in Japan. So you have the rise of fascists, so fascist style government, so a socialist dictatorship government. So the Nazis, so the National Socialist Party, and then you have a version of fascism in Italy as well. You see Mussolini standing behind Hitler. But Hitler doesn't come to power in a void. There's things happening in Germany that are allowing and creating a situation into which Hitler is able to look like a good option to the German people. So ever since World War One, Germany has basically had economic troubles, primarily because of that $33 billion payment that they're needing to make, installments of each year. And then when the Great Depression hit, because the Great Depression didn't just hit the US, it hit most of Europe and most of the world in some capacity as well. So Germany has experienced a depression. They're having to pay this great debt. So their money is virtually worthless. So like a wheelbarrow of money just to go buy groceries. And it's in this context that Hitler says, I have a solution. I can restore Germany to its former greatness. I know who to blame. I know who put us in this situation, and I can get us out of it. And that appeals to many people. Many people are sick and tired of feeling downtrodden, of feeling overwhelmed, of feeling burdened. And he said, no more. He said, I will restore Germany to greatness. Now, Hitler started off not wanting to be, a Holocaust inducing dictator. He wanted to be an artist, but he kept getting rejected. This is one of his paintings. He kept getting rejected from art school, and no one would give him the time of day. World War I rolled around. He was enlisted in the army. Fast forward, and he's tried to overthrow the German government once. Didn't work. He created the Nazi Party, and that's going to give him the avenue to slowly work his way in to eventually getting a mixture of an election and an appointment to be chancellor. They thought the Nazi Party was so small and niche that they could give it control of the German government and it wouldn't go too awry, and they could take the burden of the depression and the blame for the depression. What the other part of the government wasn't expecting in Germany was Hitler to very quickly outlaw all the other parties, begin rebuilding the military, and turn the nation into a Nazi supporting nation. So this is a very weird transition that happened rapidly and was not foreseen by many people in Germany. On top of all this, Hitler starts the Hitler Youth, which is like a Nazi Boy Scout. So it starts indoctrinating young children very early. If you watch the movie Jojo Rabbit, you get a good glimpse of what this Hitler Youth could do in convincing children of a certain mindset, even though they have no context or understand fully what they're doing. It breeds a new generation that are ideologically in line with what Hitler was wanting. So this is kind of a dark thing, but nonetheless, the idea was to build this perpetual nation, this perpetual Nazi ideology. It wasn't just targeted at young children. Adults, people of all classes really rallied to this. Now, the big problem for Germany is that a lot of what Hitler was selling in his book Mein Kampf and everything else, the way he built his party was to find a scapegoat for many of the ills of society, and that was going to be the Jewish people. He blamed them for the catastrophe of World War One. He said they were a leech on society, they sabotaged things, and blamed them, and they are going to be the outlet for much of the anger and rage of Germany. We'll see how that goes bad during the war. On the other side of the globe, in Japan, Japan is beginning its own expansion in the 1930s. So as the rest of the world is enduring the Great Depression, Japan is beginning expansion. And they target Manchuria first, using an explosion in a railroad as a justification to invade Manchuria and annex it basically into Japanese control. So they invade, they begin marching. Now America responds in a traditional American fashion by declaring neutrality. We pass a series of neutrality acts to keep us out of war. Now Franklin Roosevelt, FDR, realizes that this is a tenuous issue. In a quote, he says, Hitler is a madman, and his counselors, some of whom I personally know, are even madder than he is. So we know we're dealing with someone who is not exactly on even keel. But nonetheless, no one's at war yet, and we're not seeking war. So we're willing to stay neutral. This idea of no foreign entanglements. At the same time, you have the Spanish Civil War breaking out. And it's going to lead to the rise of another fascist leader, Franco, in Spain. And Nazi Germany is actually going to send the Condor Legion. So there's Francisco Franco that's vying for power. The German Nazis are going to send the Condor Legion, one of their new aircraft units, to basically help Franco, but more so it's as training for what Hitler knows as the coming war. Now, Berlin actually hosts the 1936 Olympics. Now, some nations were contemplating boycotting the Olympics, but in the end, most nations go. Oddly enough, Spain boycotts it. But Hitler wanted to use the Olympics as a showing off of his idealized Aryan race, his superior white, blonde hair, blue eyes race. Now, during the games, they kind of did away with most of the anti-Jewish propaganda. So they kind of sterilized Berlin for the games. But something unexpected happened. An African American, Jesse Owens, dominated the Olympics, winning multiple gold medals and putting Hitler's Aryan race in third. So think about this. Hitler's saying, oh, we're going to prove to the world that white people are the best. Then a black guy from America comes and utterly defeats him. So this is something strange. Now, what's even stranger is Owens' experience. He was a favorite in Germany. He could go out to a restaurant. It's a weird thing, a black guy in Nazi Germany being relatively accepted. Problem was, when he returns home, despite being a gold medalist, a national hero, he returns to a segregated America. So he actually had somehow more freedoms in Nazi Germany than he does in America. So that is the strangeness of what's going on at the time. So at home, he had to enter segregated theaters and go into back entrances. While in Nazi Germany, he could travel on public transportation, go into bars, do anything he really wanted to. Now, around the same time, just shortly after the Olympics, Imperial Japanese Army expands from Manchuria and goes into mainland China, targeting Nanjing. And this goes really bad. With the conquest of the city, you have what's known as the Rape of Nanjing. From December of 1937 to January of 1938, somewhere around 200,000 Chinese were murdered. There was widespread looting and rape during these 6 weeks. As many as 20,000 women were raped. So this is a gruesome, gruesome period. So this is just utter brutality. So we have to think of it in the context of racism. So Hitler was racist against pretty much everyone in the Western Hemisphere, saying white Aryan race are the idealized race. The Japanese are basically saying the same thing on the Eastern Hemisphere with Asians. They're saying they're the best Asian race. So basically, Hitler and Japan are going to divide up the world saying, we're the best of our half. So it's after the Olympics, so 1937-38, that Hitler's going to get really bad. He starts rebuilding his military and prepares to launch his war on the world, but he wants to gobble up as much territory as he can before the actual war begins. So Germany first targets part of Czechoslovakia and Austria. So basically Hitler just annexes Austria. He says Austria is German speaking. They're basically just a smaller Germany. So the German army marches into Austria and just annexes it. And Austria welcomes the Germans in. Then he targets Czechoslovakia, mainly the Sudetenland. So there's a series of mountains in the Sudetenland that basically defend Czechoslovakia from Germany. Hitler says these are all full of Germans. We want it, give it back. And this is when the rest of Europe's like, no, 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 you can't just go invade Czechoslovakia. Like Austria, okay, they're almost basically German. Hitler was Austrian. So they're like, fine, whatever. But the Sudetenland, they say, no, you can't take that. So Hitler says, no, I want it. Give it to me. It's mine. Like, we need it. So they meet at the Munich conference. So the Premier of France, Edward Dallaire, and Neville Chamberlain from England meet and get Hitler to say, this is all we want, is the Sudetenland. Give us this, and we are done. Neville Chamberlain returns home, gets off the plane, holds up the agreement, and says, I have secured peace in our time. Those would soon be words he would regret. Hitler did not just take the Sudetenland, he took all of Czechoslovakia. What's worse, back in Germany, you have Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass. This is when his war on the Jews begins. So on November 9th, 1938, the Nazis ransacked Jewish homes, burned synagogues, and attacked Jews throughout Germany. Over 1,000 synagogues will be burned. Hundreds of Jews were murdered this night. Tens of thousands and more were rounded up. Laws were passed that effectively revoked Jewish citizenship. In Germany, their property confiscated and they were thrown in concentration camps. And this begins Hitler's, what he terms, his final solution for the Jews. What's worse yet is during all this, when the Jews were most able to leave Germany, there was nowhere really for them to go. FDR goes and quickly calls a conference of 32 nations to say we must accept Jews into our countries. We must give them somewhere to come to. Most refused. Holland is in fact one of the few that accepted, which is good, but it's also unfortunate because shortly after the war began, Holland would fall under German rule. The result is going to be disastrous for these Jews. When they're most able to leave, there's nowhere for them to go. Anti-Semitism in the United States forced us to restrict Jewish immigration, saying only the most educated or the wealthiest could come, people like Albert Einstein. We took about 8,500 Jews a year, when we could have taken far more, prevented, tens of thousands from dying. We did not. And then Hitler does his boldest move. He makes a deal with Russia to invade Poland. Now, Poland had been recreated after World War I. So it was a very new nation. It's only about a decade old after it had been recreated. But the German-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact, one of the sealing deals was the Soviet Union would get half of Poland and Germany would get the other half, mainly to reunite East Prussia with mainland Germany. But it was at this point that England and France said enough is enough. You cannot have Poland. So now we will go to war. And Hitler will unleash his war on the continent. A war and battle style known as blitzkrieg or lightning war. This would very quickly begin to overwhelm the continental forces, so France and England, very quickly. Germany would spread, rapidly defeat France. We'll talk more about this in a later lecture. And then they turned their focus on England. So you see them at the Arc de Triomphe in Paris. Then they moved and attacked across the English Channel with bombing raids into England. The English are forced to send their children out of the city. They literally put name tags on them and told them where they were being shipped to and shipped their kids out of the cities while the parents stayed in the cities and continued to produce war material and maintain the city's functionality for the war despite the heavy bombing. But Americans of all walks of life were disinterested for the most part. Some sympathized with various aspects. Some of the different nationalities were sympathetic to their homeland, but most were thinking, it's not our fight. It doesn't have anything to do with us. It is not something we need to get involved in. FDR saw it slightly differently. He urged the nation to consider at least sending aid to prevent the fall of England. But he was bound by those neutrality acts, and he was having to do things very technically to get any aid to England. But that will change very shortly, and one event will bring us into the war. But we'll stop there for today, and we'll start with kind of the war in earnest in the next lecture. See you guys later.